Well, it's lovely to be out on such a sunny evening in Edinburgh, but it's a shame that we have to be out tonight protesting against the two-child cap and the rate clause. Well more than a year since Alison Thulis, my colleague at Westminster, first spotted it in the small print of a Tory budget.
Very glad to see such a huge demonstration today and so many people still coming along 1 year after the rate clause came into force to show their opposition to this vile and despicable policy. The UK government have never been able to justify this policy, and we saw that this week with Esther McVeigh's pathetic attempts to say that the rate clause was somehow double support for women and that gives them some kind of chance to talk about the most appalling and disturbing experience of their life.
As you can see behind me, we're at the very beginning of the All Under One Banner rally. You can obviously hear the pipers behind me as events are about to kick off.
It's time to aim high, look resolutely outwards, and never, ever accept second best. Above all, it's time to believe that we can. We can build that better country we know is possible. And friends, we will.
If you enjoy watching our programmes, please help us to be Scotland's independent broadcaster by signing up to become a Broadcasting Scotland supporter.
The proceeding will start shortly.
Wherever you stand, get the fresh view of what's happening in Scotland with iScot. Celebrate everything about our country with intelligent, in-depth insight from lifestyle, culture to puzzles, and all the opinions you'll need. Whether it's digital or by post, subscribe now to iScot.
State for Transport, Mr. Peter Kyle.
Good morning, Mr. Speaker. Question number 1, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. It's vital that passengers feel confident that they're buying the most appropriate ticket for their journey, which is why we're committed to review rail ticketing, removing complexity and perverse pricing in our manner. That rail review will take a long-term look at how the railway can support a fare system that delivers value for money for both passengers and taxpayers.
Peter Kyle. All for the answer. In April last year, the then Rail Minister wrote to me and said he was conducting a review of fare simplification on the Brighton Main Line. In oral questions that month, he said it would be completed rapidly. Only in the context of this government's handling of rail fares could the best part of a year be called rapid. When will that review be completed? When will fares be simplified on the Brighton Main Line?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, my predecessor undertook to review and remove some of the anomalies, and that work has already started. That took place in the fare review we've seen earlier this year. And the bigger piece of work on extending pay-as-you-go, reviewing how that can be extended across the South East. We've had a piecemeal approach where it's gone into Bedfordshire, into Hertfordshire, into parts of Surrey. We're taking a strategic approach to that, and that will be happening in the first half of this year.
Chris Green.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Devolution to Greater Manchester offers enormous opportunities to simplify rail fares right across that area. What has so far been achieved in that, and what opportunities have been taken to broaden out the ease of using different modes of public transport across Greater Manchester on a single ticket?
Well, that's very much a question for the Williams Review, which is reviewing the devolution structures we have within our transport sector. But the principle of my honourable friend's question about making it more convenient for passengers with smarter ticketing is absolutely right. The easier we make it for passengers, the more likely they will be to use the services. But that is a key question for the Williams Review, and I'll make sure his question is fed through to Mr. Williams.
Emma Hardy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Fares have gone up everywhere, and including on that Hull trains, which has been particularly difficult for residents of Hull to swallow because the reliability of the trains has been so poor. So I'm going to offer the Minister a gift this morning. I'm going to offer him an opportunity to be a hero at a cost-free price. So what I would like the Minister to do this morning is to contact First Group and put extreme pressure on them to give Hull Trains a new train 6 months earlier than they've promised. Because if he can do this, it will improve the reliability, and I'm not even asking him for any more money.
Well, that's quite unusual, to be honest, Mr. Speaker, because we have a lot of requests for money. I will obviously look at what the Honourable Lady says and get back to her.
You managed to bring it.
Mr. Virendra Sharma. Question number 2.
Mr. Speaker, the UK Government and the European Commission have agreed in principle that the two sides should negotiate a comprehensive air transport agreement. The Department is working closely with the aviation sector to ensure its requirements are factored into negotiations. The Department's aviation technical notices and the European Commission's published plans for aviation contingency preparations, alongside proposed EU regulations that was all published on the 19th of December, Mr. Speaker, clearly demonstrate that in a no-deal scenario, both sides are committed to maintaining aviation connectivity.
Mr. Virendra Sharma. Thank you for your response to my question. What estimates does the Department make on the effect of leaving the EU on the opportunities for thousands currently employed in the aviation sector as apprentices?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I think the aviation sector will continue to grow and develop as it has been in recent years. We will continue to have connections all across Europe as exist at the moment, but of course with the plans for the expansion of Heathrow Airport, there will be a real opportunity for apprenticeships in the sector. There will be a real opportunity to open up new routes around the world to emerging markets in Asia, for example. I see the next 10 years as being ones of great opportunity for the aviation sector.
Sir Desmond Swain.
The contingency arrangements of the EU are welcome, but what estimate has he made of the prospects of airports like Bournemouth that want to actually increase their routes to Europe over the next year?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I suspect the European Union has said it wants to keep flights at the current levels. I suspect that they will find that that is not a universally held view amongst member states.
John Speller.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'm sure that the Secretary of State can chew gum and walk at the same time. So while he's dealing with the viability for the future for the with their leaving the EU, can he now also deal with the current crisis, which is over drones affecting the airport? Can I give him the opportunity, therefore, to answer the questions that he didn't answer earlier in the week? Were there contingency plans already agreed with the MOD and Home Office to protect our airports from drone incidents and others? If not, why not? Were they not activated were such plans not activated in time because of dithering? Yeah. Why didn't they work? Was that the fault of the Secretary of State's Department, the Ministry of Defence, Home Office, or indeed the Cabinet Office?
Well, I listened to the Right Honourable Gentleman's question with great interest. It was tangential to the substantive question on the paper, and I just say very gently to the Right Honourable Gentleman that I had been thinking of offering him an adjournment debate on the matter until I realised that he had in fact just conducted one. Secretary of State.
Well, indeed he has, Mr. Speaker. I would simply remind him of two factors. Firstly, that the disruptive attack that took place at Gatwick was unprecedented anywhere in the world, and as a result we have been approached by airports around the world to learn more about how we tackled that. And secondly, I would point out to him, as I've said, I'm not able to discuss the nature of the technology that was used in this House for security reasons, but you will have seen earlier this week, Mr. Speaker, that when a similar issue arose at Heathrow, the response was very rapid indeed.
Colin Clark.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does the Minister agree that regional air connectivity within the UK as we leave the EU is a priority? And can he remind operators like British Airways reducing routes from Aberdeen International Airport in Gordon constituency disrupts business and leisure travel?
I absolutely agree with my honourable friend, and this is why we've put down a clear requirement that as Heathrow expands, a proportion of the capacity of Heathrow is set aside for regional connectivity within the United Kingdom. It is really important that an expanded Heathrow is a gateway for the whole United Kingdom to the opportunities around the world as well as those within the United Kingdom.
Mr. Barry, Chairman.
Mr. Speaker, can I push the Secretary of State on this? I chair the Parliamentary Air Safety Committee, and I do know a little bit about the aviation sector. In an SI upstairs, only recently, I challenged his colleague to tell me which chief executive or chair of any airline that he's talked to about this, because I've talked to them. They're terrified of impact of the going out on a no-deal Brexit. He couldn't name one.
Hear, hear.
Well, I have talked to the Chief Executive, Mr. Speaker, of every major UK airline. I've also talked to representatives of a significant number of international airlines.
Christine Jardine.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The Secretary of State has spoken to the Chief Executives. He will, of course, be aware of the concerns that they have about the contingency agreement only allowing for a freeze of the services of British Airlines as they stand at the moment. What reassurances can he give airlines out of airports like my own in Edinburgh that this will not in fact be the case and that there will be expansion should we have to leave the EU?
Well, of course, Mr. Speaker, as you say, should we have to leave the EU? The country has actually already voted to leave the EU, and we will next week vote on an agreement that would continue current aviation arrangements. So I would simply say to her, if she is concerned about the contingency plans put in place by the European Union, will she be joining the government in the division lobbies next week to support the agreement?
Shannon.
Speaker, can the Secretary of State further outline discussions held with airports in Belfast City and Belfast International to secure enhanced trading routes post-March and to evaluate what changes these airports may have to make?
Mr. Speaker, so I've had regular conversations with the leadership of the Belfast airports, working with them in a number of areas. I want to see them expand their international flights. There are, of course, more flights being planned for next summer. And I very much hope and believe they have a strong and prosperous future with better links around the world.
Cole Turner.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister's deal looks dead, and we could well be heading into the chaos of a no-deal Brexit. If that is the case, we'll no longer be a member of EASA. Given that we do not currently have a bilateral air safety agreement in place with the US, can the Minister give a guarantee that in the event of no deal, there will be no disruption to flights?
Yes, the Civil Aviation Authority, Mr. Speaker, has been working for well over a year to make sure that in the event we do not continue as members of EASA, that we have a properly functional British alternative.
Thank you.
Alex Cunningham.
3, Mr. Speaker. The services run by community transport operators are of vital importance to our transport sector and communities. During the most recent financial year, the Government supported community transport operators with almost £3.1 million through the Bus Services Operators Grant. A number of projects from the £11.5 million Building Connections Fund will also provide new community transport links to those most at risk of isolation.
Alex Cunningham.
That's a tiny amount of money to invest in community transport. My constituency is largely rural, and people in our village, particularly older people, are left isolated because profit-making bus companies are not interested in serving them. There is some community provision, but very little funding. Can the Minister offer my isolated communities some comfort and commit to more money for that sector, either directly funded or through the combined authority? The honourable member will be aware that community transport operators, even within his own community, have recently opened up a new service, as recently as a few months ago, with extra support from this department and the BSOG Fund. I looked on his local council website to check what was happening with community transport, and there was a reference to the funding that the Department for Transport had provided, with a quote I see from his council saying that the excellent public community transport in the borough was being provided by funding provided by the Department for Transport.
Martin Vickers.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Until recently, the number 5 bus service that passes through South Killingham in my constituency was supported by a government grant. The local authority are making provision for community transport to provide an alternative, but it will not replace the existing service. Would the Minister agree to meet with me to discuss whether other funding streams can be found to support this service?
My honourable friend, the member for Cleethorpes, is a strong advocate for his constituency. I'm not exactly sure which funding stream he's talking about, so yes, of course, let's sit down and talk about it and see what we can do.
Louise Hay.
Meadowgreen Health Centre in Sheffield is moving, leaving the entire Low Edges estate completely unconnected to its GP surgery. Does the Minister agree that under such circumstances, passenger authorities should be required to consult on bus routes to ensure that they are connected to GP surgeries? And will she write to South Yorkshire Passenger Authority to ensure that they do just that?
The honourable member raises two very important points. I will sit down and meet with her and see what I can do to help out. And you're right, if bus services are being changed, they need to be communicating not only with the Traffic Commissioner but also with the local community too. So I'm more than happy to sit down and see what is happening here.
Robert Court. Thank you, Mr Speaker. When can we expect a full government response on the Section 19 and 22 permits?
These are two very important permits, and I know that previously it's caused some anxiety in the sector, so of course we carried out a consultation, and I want to make sure that we respond appropriately, which is why we're going to take our time to make sure we get it absolutely right. What's important to note is that we're working with community transport operators, the Community Transport Association, which also receives a substantial amount of funding from us. What's important to note, Mr Speaker, is that the status quo, as it is today, for community transport operators continues going forward.
Thank you. Drew Hendry.
What steps is he taking to ensure that community transport groups will not require a no licence when the government aligns Section 19 and 22 permits with EU regulations? The proposals that went out for consultation still carry a risk that small and medium-sized groups will need to pay in the range of £80,000 to £100,000, which would lead to the widespread disruption of these services. Does he understand it? Do you understand these risks? Sorry, does the Minister understand these risks?
And no doubt, I don't need to point out to the honourable member that I'm a she, not a he, but no matter. And we are very supportive of community transport operators, which is why the consultation was so important, and which is why we're going to make sure that our response actually fits the fantastic volunteering work that takes place within our community transport network.
Matt Rodder.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Community transport is a lifeline for many older or disabled people who would otherwise be trapped in their own homes. Yet the government is proposing to introduce a significant and indeed unwanted extra burden on the charities which run these vital services. Age UK has reported that the majority of their community transport services would be forced to close because of the government's mistaken proposals. Will the Minister now commit to reconsidering her approach and to working with rather than against the charities which run these vital services?
I'm a little bit confused by the honourable member's statement, because we are yet to put out our government's response, and we are indeed working with the charities sector, including with the Community Transport Association and with community transport operators. There is an EU regulation that we are trying to make this fit into, but what we are committed to doing is ensuring that our community transport operators continue to operate, which is why we have the £3 million fund and also the £11.5 million Building Connections Fund.
Me Shepherd.
Mr Speaker.
Mr Speaker, with your permission, I'd like to answer this question together with numbers 9 and 16. The Department's been working for some time to ensure that traffic can continue to flow through UK ports as frictionally as possible in all scenarios when we leave the European Union. This is including engaging closely with others across government, with ports and their representative bodies. As regards ferry capacity, I would refer the House back to the two statements I made earlier this week.
Tommy Shepherd.
Mr Speaker, the Government will forgive the House some scepticism about its efficacy and intention in this regard. Surely the Seaborne fiasco shows that only one of two things can be happening. Either there is abject incompetence in the preparations for no deal, or he and his department are not really taking it seriously. Which is it?
Well, what's disappointing, Mr Speaker, is, as a Scottish member, I would hope you would welcome the additional opportunities for Scottish business that will be provided through expanded services from the East Coast ports through to Northern Europe with DFDS, which is a very substantial part of the contracts that we have let.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Seaborne Freight has negative equity of just over $374,000, while its director is currently being investigated by the government for a trail of debt to previous companies. Yet, due diligence didn't flag this up. Can he confirm if this is because due diligence guidance was not to look at individuals and trading history, only Seaborne's proposals, and why was such guidance provided?
Well, Mr. Speaker, as I said in the House earlier this week, we won't be paying Seaborne until ferries operate. But from the point of view of business in Scotland, we have made sure that there are additional routes available from the East Coast ports to Northern Europe that should be, I think, in the event of a no-deal Brexit, which I hope will not happen, a really valuable alternative for Scottish business, and he should welcome that.
Sandy Martin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can the Minister tell us how long his department has estimated it will take to recruit and train the thousands of additional customs officers that will be required if we leave without a deal? And what conversations has he had with HMRC about this?
Well, I'm very confident, as I've said, Mr. Speaker, that HMRC will be ready. And of course, the point is, we at the moment do not collect customs tariffs and we do not carry out checks. And the government has said very clearly that our prime priority in a post-Brexit world will be on the fluidity of trade. Other things can follow. Security, of course, remains of paramount importance, but beyond that, other things can follow. That is the approach the government's taking. Post-Brexit world will be on the follow. That is the approach the government's taking.
Mr. Stephen Crabb.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I've got two ports in my constituency which run ferry connections from Guildford Haven and Fishguard to Ireland. They assure me that they've got the skills and the capacity to handle a variety of different Brexit scenarios, but all they see at the moment is the promise of further argument in this place. My right honourable friend agree with me that we have a duty in this House to provide a way forward for this industry, and those who take comfort in just opposing everything are failing in their responsibilities.
Well, I agree with my honourable friend. The reality is it's all well and good the party opposite saying we don't want no deal, but then they're going to vote against the deal. And they haven't come up with any credible alternative plan. And so I'm afraid I take with a very large pinch of salt most of what the party opposite says at the moment.
Philip Hollowbone.
He confirmed to the House that the government has signed the Common Transit Convention, which means that in the event of a no-deal Brexit, customs declarations and import duties, as now, will only be required to be paid when the goods finally arrive at their final destination.
This is absolutely correct. I mean, in very many international trading scenarios, using the Common Transit Convention, customs processes could be at the start and the end of the journey. And this is one of the reasons, Mr. Speaker, when I said to the House earlier this week that I was confident that in all circumstances trade would continue to move relatively freely, that I felt able to do so.
Lillian Greenwood.
Mr. Speaker. It's been reported that his department is in talks with 2 rail freight companies about options to provide additional services via the Channel Tunnel and HS1 to ensure supplies of food and medicines in the event of blockages at Kent ports. It's also claimed that the department has written to South Eastern Trains warning of possible disruption to their services if additional daytime freight movements are required. Is his department really contemplating emergency rail timetables in the event of no-deal Brexit? Has he written to South Eastern regarding such contingency plans? And should the many thousands of rail commuters in Kent be bracing themselves for possible disruption?
No, the story is untrue.
Mr. Alan Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Secretary of State's responses in Tuesday's urgent question this morning so far on the Seaborne fiasco are disgraceful, frankly. He's awarded an emergency ferry contract to a company with no boats, no ports agreement, no personnel, debts and key personnel with dubious trading past. Parliament needs answers. How were Seaborne identified as a company that merited direct negotiations for an emergency contract?
Well, Mr. Speaker, it's a bit like the proverbial stuck gramophone record. I said very clearly earlier this week that we have let contracts with a number of operators, of which Seaborne represents around 10%. We pay no money unless the service is delivered. And perhaps just to clarify further what the Chair of the Select Committee said a moment ago, we are talking to a number of other potential outlets. Were extra capacity to be needed? Rail, ports, maritime. But absolutely nothing else has been decided. We have not issued instructions to any rail company about disruptive timetables, and we haven't taken any further steps to put additional measures in place. We're simply checking the lie of the land so we can respond to all eventualities.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is an emergency contract that he thought was so critical it could circumvent EU procurement rules for direct negotiation. and yet he says, well, it's only 10%, and don't worry if they don't deliver, they don't get paid. That means they don't deliver that emergency service. We know how sensitive Dover is, and predictions of time delays that could lead to 30-mile queues. If that 10% isn't delivered, what's the impact on Dover?
Well, Mr. Speaker, this is why 90% of the new contracts are with DFDS and Brittany Ferries. And as I said, I'm disappointed that the SNP don't welcome the DFDS contract that will provide additional routes, Mr. Speaker, from East Coast ports to Northern Europe that will be beneficial to Scottish business.
Nick MacDonald.
Mr. Speaker, putting to one side the ridiculous and desperate allegations of the Secretary of State that Labour is somehow anti-business and his banal allegations over Brexit, the Seabourn fiasco lays bare his total incompetence and the complete failure of due diligence. Before granting the ferry contract, was he aware of the debt or the promissory note as between Ben Sharp, now Seabourn CEO, and Mid-Gulf, acknowledging Sharp's indebtedness to that company of over $1 million and which remains unpaid?
Well, Mr. Speaker, he clearly got under his skin because he really doesn't like government supporting new start-up businesses. And the reality is, Mr. Speaker, as I said earlier this week, due diligence on this contract was done by Slaughter and May, by Deloitte and by Mott MacDonald, as you would expect. And off the back of that, we formed a contract which we pay nothing for until the service is delivered.
Andy MacDonald.
Here's another one you mightn't answer. A variety of legal challenges to the Minister may well flow as a result of this debacle from, amongst others, existing service providers of freight with capacity. And on Tuesday he said that Seabourn will be able to run ferry services immediately. But on Wednesday the government said that Seabourn won't be able to open the route between Ramsgate and Ostend until late April at the very earliest. Surely this puts Seabourn in default of its contract to deliver services from the 29th of March, and the contract is therefore void. In those circumstances, shouldn't the Minister reverse his appalling judgment and cancel this contract without delay?
Mr. Speaker, we will hold all of the companies who have presented us with proposals to the terms of their contracts.
And Luke Pollard.
5, please, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The current cross-country franchise runs until October this year, with a possible extension to October next year. The honourable member should be assured that we are working to look at all options for the new cross-country franchise, including rolling stock. We'll look at adding much-needed capacity to the cross-country services as soon as trains become available. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In November, an unbelievable 30% of cross-country trains to Plymouth terminated early at Exeter because the Voyager trains can't get through Dawlish in bad weather. So as well as placing orders for new rolling stock for the long term, will the Minister look at requiring cross-country to use the GWR HST trains that are currently being replaced with newer trains to give cross-country extra interim Dawlish-proof capacity? Well, I had a very positive meeting with the honourable member and his local council leader yesterday. We agree on the importance of the South West economy, and particularly its connectivity, recognise entirely the issue with the Voyager trains and how they are affected by the salt water that they are exposed to. Cross Country are working on an engineering solution to that, and we're working on adding capacity into the franchise. Franchise passenger numbers have grown by 25%, so we need to put more rolling stock into it. But that will look including where we can get the trains from to expand that capacity.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As the member for Plymouth Sutton Devonport has already outlined, there are constant issues with cross-country services west of Exeter due to the lack of resilience they have on the Dawlish coastal stretch. Can the Minister outline to me how, and reassure me that, one, not only will the future rolling stock requirements make a difference to this issue, but also the work we're doing to improve the resilience of this iconic coastal line?
Well, my honourable friend is absolutely correct. Protecting the line at Dawlish is critical, and it just sends a broader signal that the South West is open for business and all of the connectivity which matters. So this is a national priority. Essential work is underway now to repair 4 existing breakwaters in the area, and we have committed £15 million for further development work, and making sure that this line is resilient and the South West is open for business is a priority.
My bet.
Mr. Speaker,
Before Christmas, I travelled between Leeds and Sheffield on a cross-country train and experienced what my constituents experience on a regular basis, as many passengers standing as sitting. The simple fact is that the 4-car trains on the most busiest part of the route between Leeds and Birmingham are simply inadequate. When we get a new franchise, will he ensure that those 4-car trains are extended so the capacity is there so people can actually get a seat on them?
I recognise entirely the crowding issues that he describes and has experienced personally, and I have also experienced personally. So we are certainly looking to add capacity in the next franchise, but we're also looking to add capacity before that franchise comes into force, if we can find it.
Like Sheffield, we don't get much salt water in the West Midlands. But can I say to my honourable friend that West Midlands Railway is now purchasing over £1 billion worth of new rolling stock? Could he not use that model with the cross-country franchise?
Well, I'm aware of the new rolling stock that's coming into the West Midlands, and it's coming in across many, many parts of our network. We have a fantastic story on rolling stock coming in over the next 2 years. I will look at what my honourable friend says and get back to him with an answer.
Number 6, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Richard George was appointed by the Secretary of State to review the operational performance challenges on the railway in the north of England following the introduction of the May 2018 timetable. This includes the performance of the services operating through the Castlefield corridor, which therefore includes Oxford Road. The Department continues to work with TfN, Richard George and the industry to find solutions to improve performance.
Graham Stringer.
A review, Mr. Speaker, simply isn't good enough. More than 3/4 of the trains at Oxford Road do not comply with the timetable. We've had delays, cancellations, reviews. We need an immediate implementation of the Northern Hub investment programme. That would be extra platforms at Salford, extensions of platforms at Oxford Road, moving to new platforms 15 and 16. Will the Minister not do that and reject the ridiculous idea that this problem can be solved by digitalising the signalling system when you've got such mixed rolling stock on these rails?
Well, the problem, which is clearly there because the Castlefield corridor is a bottleneck on our network, it will be solved by a variety of solutions, some of which will be technical. Funding has been set aside in CP6 and we are working on what that was spent on.
Green.
Mr. Speaker, my constituents who use the line from Oxford Road through my constituency to Liverpool Lime Street continue to experience repeated delays and overcrowding, and they are told to expect this situation to continue at least until April. What penalties is Northern Rail going to face, since much of this seems to be due to lack of rolling stock and lack of train crew?
Well, if any of the train operating companies is in breach of its franchise, there are mechanisms to hold them to account. In this particular case with Northern, it is run through the Rail North Partnership, which is a combination of the Department for Transport and Transport for the North.
Mary Cray.
Question 7, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Department is very mindful of the affordability of rail services, and we've capped regulated fares in line with inflation for the 6th year in a row. And announced last week, we have extended the 16-17 rail card, offering 50% off all rail journeys. Together with a recently launched 26 to 30-year-old rail card, this means that everybody up to the age of 30 will have access to discounted rail fares.
I thank the Minister for that reply, but 2018 was an abysmal year for rail travel, with tens of thousands of services cancelled in Yorkshire and across the country. And services in Yorkshire are amongst the least reliable anywhere in the UK. And it's having a huge impact on Wakefield City Centre. Can I ask him to look again at the excellent recommendation from the Transport Select Committee to enable season ticket holders to have a discount on their season tickets on the worst performing lines, which at the moment are TransPennine Express and Northern Rail, both of which are used heavily by my constituents who do not have the time to go and claim for every train service that doesn't turn up on a daily basis.
Well, I'm acutely aware that passengers across the north and in other parts of our network did see an unacceptable service in 2018, and those who were most directly affected received targeted compensation worth around 8% to those northern passengers, so obviously far more than the rail increase that we have just seen. There are further compensation funds available. We're arguing that with the TFN, how that money is spent.
Hugh Merriman.
Speaker, can I warmly welcome the decision to extend the discounted fares for 16 and 17-year-olds. In my constituency, 4 of my 5 secondary schools have no sixth form. We require our students to stay on to 18 and they have to travel either north to Kent by train or to the south coast by train. I've always been a big believer in giving it 100%, Mr Speaker, so could I encourage the front bench to have this as their long-term aspiration so that we give 100% discount to 16 and 17-year-olds for rail fares?
Well, that would indeed be a very bold aspiration, Mr Speaker. And obviously we want to make sure that we have a viable rail service. If we can offer greater value, then we certainly will. That's why we have capped rail fares in line with inflation for the 6th year in a row, and we are very keen to offer value across the rail network wherever we can.
And Derek Thomas.
Mr Speaker. The Transport Minister and other ministers will be aware of how long it takes to get right down to Penzance in my constituency. Too long. And also the fact that people very much depend on that form of transport. But actually the truth is that average wage across my constituency is about a third of the rest of the country. And so can the Minister give some consideration about how, because of the dependency and distance people travel and as a result the cost of fares, can some fairness be inserted so that my constituents pay less for rail travel that they depend on?
Well, if it is possible to deliver greater value, then of course we will look at those opportunities, and the review of rail fares is a part of the Williams review, and I'll make sure that my honourable friend's comments are fed over to Mr Williams for his consideration.
Cadbury.
Question number 8, Mr Speaker.
Mr Speaker, the Honourable Lady will be aware that the airport's national policy statement requires 50% of passengers to use public transport by 2030, rising to 55% by 2040. It also requires 25% fewer staff car trips to work by 2030 and 50% by 2040. In addition, I expect Heathrow to meet its public pledge of no greater airport-related traffic.
Cadbury.
Thank you. The Terminal 5 inspector recommended that expansion should be dependent on additional rail access, and we've seen the consequences locally of that not happening. The Department for Transport's own figures say a third runway will put an additional 54,000 vehicles a day on our local road system. So will the Secretary of State make any further expansion at Heathrow conditional on western and southern rail access?
Well, I actually want to go further than that, Mr Speaker. As shall be known, Western Rail access is currently in development. We're in the early stages of preparation for Southern Rail access. We are making provision at Old Oak Common for a Chiltern connection into that station that will provide a link into Heathrow. We of course have HS2 that will arrive at Old Oak Common and deliver an opportunity to connect into Heathrow from a different route. And of course finally, Mr Speaker, it's my hope that the Mayor of London will, notwithstanding the financial challenges at TfL, deliver the Piccadilly line upgrade that's so important.
Dean Greening.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The Terminal 5 planning conditions that were set as part of its go-ahead were that there would be no third runway, that there would be a legal limit on flights of 480,000 flights a year. Of course, now we're getting a third runway, and last week Heathrow has now asked, and I presume will be granted, the permission to go beyond its 480,000 flight cap. Isn't the reality that any assurances, whether legal or ministerial or public pledges from Heathrow, are actually utterly meaningless?
Well, Mr Speaker, my right honourable friend has made her point very succinctly. She will also understand, though, that if an application comes forward from Heathrow to change the current rules, it will be wrong of me as Secretary of State to pass comment one way or the other on it at the moment.
Bruce Lauder.
The Secretary of State mentions the Piccadilly line upgrade, but he knows that and indeed Crossrail are there to cope with existing and future passenger demand, but not Heathrow expansion. Given we know that Heathrow, as always, will do nothing to cope with the problems that it causes, what's the government going to do when there's this massive increase in passengers, a 50% increase in flights, and no capacity on those lines to deal with it?
Well, Mr Speaker, just on the point of the Piccadilly line, of course the Piccadilly line, even an expanded Heathrow, is only forecast to need 6% of the capacity on the Piccadilly line. But, as I said a moment ago, what are we doing? We're already moving ahead with Western Access. We're starting the process of Southern Access. I'm making provision for a Chiltern route into Old Oak Common and connecting to Heathrow via Crossrail. HS2 will come to Old Oak Common as part of the first phase of that project. So I think we're doing rather a lot to prepare for surface access to Heathrow.
Ian Moore.
Mr. Speaker.
Access for All has delivered step-free, accessible routes at more than 200 stations since it was launched in 2006. A further 19 stations are currently under construction. To build on this success, we have made a further £300 million available to extend the programme. 300 stations have been nominated for this funding, and I expect to announce the successful stations in April.
Damien Moore.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank my honourable friend for that answer. One of the stations to be nominated is Hillside Station in my constituency. Now, my honourable friend has highlighted the criteria which will be used, but would she agree with me that stations like Hillside, which play host less frequent sporting events, like the Open at Royal Birkdale, which hosted 235,000 spectators, should be used and taken into account when these applications are decided upon?
My honourable friend will be pleased to know that Hillside Station has indeed been nominated, and when preparing for nominations, the industry was asked to include any relevant factors, and the nomination for Hillside did include details of the Open. Every factor will be given due weight during the ongoing selection process. All I can say for now is that I hope there will be good news for my honourable friend and his constituents in April.
Mr. David Hanson.
To get to the south side of Flint Station in my constituency from the car park involves 2 footbridges, and it is one of the projects that have been nominated in November of last year. Could the Minister assure me that the access to funds for these projects will be maintained in the current spending review?
We have £300 million available at the moment. We've had 300 nominations, and all of the issues that my honourable member has raised will be taken into account. It's important to note that step-free access journeys are increasing from 50% in 2005 to 75% today.
Mr. Speaker, as the Minister knows, at Beeston, if you want to get from one platform to the other, the advice is to take a taxi all the way round. It is a wholly unacceptable situation, and I'm grateful for the Minister's acceptance of that as much as she can, and of course we've also bid for the funding. The Minister last year agreed to come to Beeston Station to see it for herself. Can she give me now an assurance that she'll be coming, certainly before Easter, please?
My honourable friend knows that we have spoken about Beeston on a number of occasions, and I do apologise for not failing to visit the station previously, and I will do my very best to accompany my honourable friend at the station in the near future.
Am I James Bray?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can the Minister ensure that the Access for All project is delivered in Northwich Station in my constituency, which allow people with mobility problems and disabilities to actually use that train station?
I can't provide that assurance right here and right now. We had 300 nominations, and the decisions were made in April, and if the station was nominated, I don't have the list in front of me, I will make sure that it is looked as efficiently as it can be.
Question 11, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This government is investing at record levels in our rail network as part of the biggest rail modernisation programme for over a century to provide reliability and capacity. Passengers expect high-quality rail services, and we are committed to electrification where it delivers passenger benefits and value for money, but we'll also take advantage of state-of-the-art new technology to improve services.
It strikes me that a lot of official capacity is currently being sucked out of the department by preparations for no-deal Brexit, and this is slowing up projects that we really should be pushing ahead with. Can I ask what progress is being made on the electrification, on the plans for electrification of the Chester and Crewe and North Wales line, or if not electrification, for the procurement of these electro-diesel trains, which are the next best option?
Well, the work on Brexit is not in any way changing the delivery of service improvements across our rail network. We only have to see how much is happening across our network to prove that point wrong. We're delivering a £50 million project to upgrade the North Wales Railway, including a new signalling system, and in terms of rolling stock, they'll be picked up as the franchise is renewed.
Jeff Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Passenger numbers on the Transpennine route are set to double over the next 20 years.
but still it appears that the upgrade is being downgraded. As a third of transport spending in England is in London, will the Transport Secretary help to redress the imbalance by matching Labour's commitment to Crossrail for the North?
Well, I don't accept the premise of the Honourable Gentleman's question. The Transpennine route upgrade is a significant project. We're modernising the entire route. We will be investing £2.9 billion in the first phase of this ambitious upgrade between Manchester, Leeds and York. The work will commence in the spring. It is the biggest single project of rail enhancement in this country during CP6. It's complementary to the work on Northern Powerhouse Rail, which is also being developed.
Mr. Dennis Skinner.
Wouldn't it make a lot more sense to have electrification of the Midland line from in the whole of it, instead of stopping at Kettering and in Northamptonshire? And if that happened, we could save some of that £56 billion that it costs us for the HS2. It would save about 30 to 40 houses in Derbyshire that are due to be knocked down. All of those things could happen if he would get electrification of that Midland line, and they would get to London quicker. Not that I want it, but that's one of the promises that the government's made, to get to London 30 minutes quicker. For God's sake, make a big hole in that £56 billion and electrify the Midland line.
Well, I can just tell the Honourable Gentleman that we will not be cancelling HS2. HS2 is a positive project which will generate significant extra capacity right across our network and is part of a modern 21st century rail network. As regards the Midland Main Line, well, to deliver the journey improvements, we do not need to electrify the whole route, and we are seeing passenger benefits from a brand new fleet of trains from 2022.
Maskell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Labour's commitment to electrification has unwavered, yet the government have pulled electrification projects across the country. Last month, we learnt that the Transpennine route will no longer support future freight, meet journey times reliability, and without electrification will not deliver on reliability either.
Order. The former Secretary of State is chanting animatedly from a sedentary position about a period of time and a mileage, that is to say a length of track. But I can assume only that at this stage, albeit in a very amiable and jocular fashion, the Right Honourable Gentleman is talking to himself. There are some dangers in that. Rachel Maskell. Only time will tell. Rachel Maskell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last month, as I was saying, we learnt that the Transpennine route upgrade will no longer support future freight, meet journey time ambitions, and without electrification will not deliver on reliability either, depending on heavy and polluting diesel bi-mode trains. Mr. Speaker, it's a downgrade of a downgrade. So why won't the Minister listen to the advice of rail experts, which I know the Secretary of State has had, and fully electrify the route in Control Period 6?
Well, Mr. Speaker, that was absolute nonsense. Labour electrified 10 miles of existing network in all their 13 years of government. There is more electrification that's taken place in just the North West in this government and the entire period of the last 13 years of Labour. So no lessons from the party opposite on this issue. In terms of the Transpennine upgrade, we are spending £2.9 billion. It is the biggest single project in CP6, as I identified to the member opposite only a moment ago. So in terms of criticising, Labour should be supporting this project and maybe asking themselves why they didn't actually do it. We will take no lessons whatsoever from the party opposite, who did nothing at all for our rail network.
Rosendale.
12, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Good morning. My honourable friend is absolutely right to raise this very important question of Crossrail.
he will know that this is a wholly owned subsidiary of TfL, and it is for them in the first instance to evaluate the future. But we feel very excited, notwithstanding recent hiccups, at the potential for this project.
For his reply, but he will understand the huge disappointment in Romford, where we were hoping that Crossrail would be coming into action much sooner, but at least in part due to the Mayor's poor financial management of TfL, we've got to wait a lot longer. So will he assure the House that the new funding package will actually bring Crossrail to fruition much sooner?
Well, as I have said, Crossrail is a wholly owned subsidiary of the TfL. It would be wrong for me to comment on the way in which the Mayor has handled the finances of TfL. That is a matter for him. I will say, though, that we think that this is a very important project. There is a new Chief Executive, as he will be aware, and that's Mr. Wilde, and he is understandably taking time to review the project fully before publishing his own views.
Mr. Speaker, last night the Evening Standard reported that officials from the Department of Transport and TfL were first notified about the delays in Crossrail in June 2016. Can the Minister confirm that that's correct?
Well, I haven't seen the report he describes, but I can say he will know that we published a written ministerial statement on the question of whether there might be delays in, or touching that, in July. What is striking is that the Secretary of State wasn't notified until the end of August, and there has been some suggestion that actually TfL was notified before that.
Mark Garnier.
13, Mr. Speaker.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is a very important issue, the issue of Vanook and insurance, and he's absolutely right to raise it. Our assessment is perfectly clear, Mr. Speaker. This proposal has the potential, if it is not amended, to shut down UK and European motorsport industries. We take it with great seriousness, and he's absolutely right to raise this. And of course there are further impacts on innovation across the UK automotive industry and potentially more widely.
Mark Garnier.
I'm very grateful to the Minister for his response to that. From my conversations with the Motorsport Industry Association, they cannot sing the praises of the Department and their officials more highly over this incredibly important point. But if the Motor Insurance Directive comes into force, not only will it completely destroy the market for our most innovative part of the automotive sector, but during the transition period it may also destroy the market domestically in the UK. I know the Minister is doing everything he can to try and sort this out, but can I ask him to redouble his efforts as hard as he can in order to make sure that we do not lose the crown jewels of our motor industry?
Yeah. Well, he's absolutely right to raise. I thank him very much for the recognition of the work that my officials and I have been doing on this issue. We do take it extremely seriously. Lotus, Williams, McLaren, this country has a £10 billion motorsport industry. These ill-judged arrangements might put that at risk, and we are determined to do everything we can to prevent that.
And Dr. Rosanna Allen Khan.
Question 14, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Officials from my department have met with the Premier League most recently in November to discuss collaboration between the railway industry and football bodies to improve travel to and from football matches. The Rail Delivery Group are a key partner in that ongoing collaboration.
Dr. Rosanna Allen Khan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Football fans in this country are often stung when fixtures are rescheduled on TV, meaning that they regularly miss out on the cheapest train tickets. The Premier League, the English Football League and the Rail Delivery Group are all in favour of a fans' fair scheme, but the Department for Transport are dragging their feet. Will the Minister agree to meet with me to discuss how we can address this important issue which affects so many football fans in this country?
Yes. Well, a joint project involving the Rail Delivery Group, train operators, football bodies, supporters groups, the British Transport Police and the DfT has been set up to look at a range of issues around football-related train travel, and this includes exploring flexible ticketing offer for supporters, which would include where matches are rescheduled. I'm happy to have a conversation with the Honourable Lady. I'd also be interested to hear if she will condemn the strikes across the north on Saturdays, which are affecting the capacity of football fans to get to their matches. So let's hear Labour say something on behalf of football fans across the north and not in support of strikers.
Having heard the right honourable gentleman from his seat, we can now have the considerable joy of hearing him on his feet. Sir Patrick McLaughlin.
But will my right honourable friend look at the responsibilities across his whole department and other sectors of his department as far as this is concerned? Last night the M1 was closed for 4 hours, thus stopping all the supporters of Burton Albion getting to the Etihad Stadium. And will there be an inquiry into why it was necessary to close the M1 for 4 hours on both sides?
It's a lot of goals.
I think my right honourable friend makes a very valuable point. I entirely agree with his point, and we'll pick that up and talk across the department.
Order. Topical questions. Liz McInnes.
Question number 1, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, could I possibly start by extending the condolences, I hope, of the whole House to the family of Lee Pomeroy, who was tragically murdered on a train in Surrey last week. And could I also pay particular tribute to the 3 members of staff who dealt with that tragic situation, as well as to all the British Transport Police who responded to it. They all acted with great bravery. And could I also, when we talk about bravery, pay tribute to the British Transport Police officer who was stabbed in Manchester during the terrorist incident a few days ago.
Liz McInnes.
I thank the Secretary of State for that answer, and I share his sentiments about the terrible attacks on our trains recently. Now, on the 2nd of January, I was at Castleton Station in my constituency, watching train cancellation after train cancellation as my constituents were trying to get back to work after the New Year break. So does the Secretary of State think it is fair to hit rail passengers with an above-inflation fares rise, given the clear decline in punctuality, reliability and worsening overcrowding on our trains?
Mr. Speaker, first of all, we have set a limit in line with inflation for the increase in regulated fares. I would also say to her that there is additional financial resource from the compensation package provided last summer that Transport for North and the Rail North Partnership have, which, if they choose to do so, can be used on lines that continue to be affected by underperformance. And I'll be very happy to see them do that.
Andrew Rosendale.
The Minister will be aware that it is illegal for a taxi not to collect someone with a guide dog, yet 42% of taxis still refuse to do this. Will the government please bring in new strict guidelines to raise awareness throughout the taxi and minicab industry?
Honourable friend raises a very important issue. For over a decade, it has been illegal for taxi and private hire drivers to refuse assistant dogs, and I'm clear that they must comply with the law. We cannot risk lowering people's confidence and travel independently. Licensing authorities have the power to stop this happening by training drivers to understand their duties and by prosecuting them when they fail to comply. We are indeed considering the recommendations mentioned by my honourable friend, and we will be publishing a response in due course.
Carl Turner.
Mr. Speaker, due to undercutting caused by the exclusion of seafarers from equality and minimum wage legislation, UK seafarers only account for about 15% of all seafarer ratings in the UK shipping industry. Mr. Speaker, that is shocking. But now that the Secretary of State has spent £103 million of UK taxpayers' money on these UK ferry contracts, will the Minister say whether there will be any UK seafarers employed, and will the crews be protected by UK employment legislation? Yes or no?
I'm afraid that the honourable member is mistaken and hasn't heard what the Secretary of State has mentioned earlier. It is no money has yet exchanged hands, and of course it's up to the company how they crew their ships. What's important to note is that we are working with BAYS to ensure that we can deliver the national minimum wage for our seafarers.
Craig Tracy.
Mr. Speaker, I was alarmed to see traffic chaos caused by yet another incident on the A5 Manchester Island this week, caused by an overturned lorry. It's an issue I've raised before, so it's not an isolated incident. Will the Minister agree to meet with me to discuss this precarious junction and look again at what more can be done to protect local residents who live alongside it, as well as motorists using it?
Well, my honourable friend has been a very tireless campaigner for transport issues in his constituency, and I'd be delighted to meet with him.
Vera Hobhouse.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In my Bath constituency, it has been suggested that our regional mayor, the Wickham mayor, has the power to adopt an underused bit of highways from Highways England to construct east of Bath Park and Ride. And for context, the council has failed for a long time to find a suitable site. Is the minister's understanding that the regional mayor has these powers, and would the minister agree that such a use of existing tarmac is an elegant solution?
I will resist the temptation to comment in advance on the elegance of the solution, Mr. Speaker, but I think it's a very interesting idea in principle. As she may be aware, it would require the transfer of the road from Highways England and the agreement of the Secretary of State. We'd also want to be sure that any changes were consistent with the Combined Authority's long-term transport plans, but subject to those constraints, we'd be very interested to see it.
Neither the police nor DVLA have records of foreign registered vehicles which have been in the UK for more than 6 months, which means that our roads are more dangerous and there is not equality under the law for British nationals. What is the government going to do about this issue?
Well, as my old friend will be aware, the problem concerns foreign registered vehicles. For British nationals, there is an equality under the law. I recognise that there's a concern in this issue, and he knows that we seek vigorously to apply road traffic legislation where we can. It's for the police in the first instance. In some cases, local authorities do use international debt recovery agents, but I recognise the problem that he describes.
Sharma.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. How much was the total cost of Operation Brock? And will the minister release the lessons learned?
Well, I don't have immediate at hand the cost, but the point about Operation Brock is it is designed to replace Operation Stack and provide a solution well into the early 2020s in the case of disruption at the Channel ports. What I do not want to see, the answer, it's low tens of millions of pounds to do the work on the M20 and the work that's happened on the M26, but I can give him an exact number. But, Mr. Speaker, it's really important we do not see a repeat of the disruption of 2015 in Kent.
Speaker, Knutsford commuters have been repeatedly promised for an upgrade to the Knutsford to Manchester line to 2 trains an hour. However, after excuses and procrastinations, that is now not happening at the time it was meant to happen. This is unacceptable to have such an unreliable and irregular service for such a busy part of the country. So can the Secretary of State intervene, speak with Northern, speak to Network Rail and get this promise fulfilled?
I entirely agree with my right honourable friend that we want to see reliable services offering high capacity, and she speaks well on behalf of her constituency. I will of course look into the matter and get back to her.
Yuri Brock.
Mr. Speaker, the Financial Times reports that the EU has warned the owner of British Airways, AIG, its plans to allow flights to continue in and around Europe in the event of no deal are not acceptable. When asked how BA plans to ensure its plans are acceptable, its chief executive replied, magic. Given the Cabinet Secretary's repeated assurances these negotiations are in hand, what more serious assessment can he give us that this will be resolved?
Well, Mr. Speaker, this is really an issue for the Spanish and Irish governments. It doesn't affect British Airways at all, who will be covered by the transition arrangements as well as by the international agreements we have in place. It is an issue, Mr. Speaker, for Iberia and for Aer Lingus, who clearly will want to carry on flying within the European Union.
I declare my interest as a member of Kettering Borough Council. What further progress is being made by the Roads Minister and his team towards tabling the statutory instrument to facilitate the decriminalisation of parking in Kettering?
Well, as my honourable friend will know, we having discussed it at some very considerable length over a long period, this matter presently rests with discussions with Northamptonshire County Council, but we are pushing ahead as fast as we can on the matter.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Following December's fiasco at Gatwick Airport, the Secretary of State displayed his characteristic Midas touch when he said on Monday the government are taking action to ensure that passengers can have confidence that their journeys will not be disrupted in future. 24 hours later, Heathrow passengers found themselves having their flights suspended following another drone sighting. When can passengers expect this promised action to have the desired effect?
Well, Mr. Speaker, first of all, let's be clear. There is no perfect off-the-shelf system available to airports that will simply deal with this problem overnight. What I would say is I would pay tribute to those in the police and the military and across government who responded so quickly to the Heathrow problem, ensuring that the runway was closed for a very short space of time, and indeed I should say to the team at Heathrow who did the same.
Heathrow.
Mr. Speaker, now that HS2's consultation on the working draft environmental statement has closed, has my right honourable friend had any indication when HS2 will publish their response? Can he ensure that every submission will be given careful consideration?
Minister. I can indeed provide assurances to my right honourable friend that all submissions will be given appropriate consideration and the report will be published in due course.
Emma Dentco.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Currently, just 1 out of 10 tube stations in Kensington are step-free. This is unacceptable. The Council and the Deputy Mayor for London and Transport tell us we must rely on developer funding to pay for it, which will never be enough. And in some instances, they suggested just funding one platform in one direction, which is insulting. Just 50 stations out of 270 are step-free in the capital, the worst record in Europe. Will the Minister please review government funding to address the severe lack of inclusivity across our capital's transport system, which is a national disgrace?
I believe that the honourable member is talking about the underground, which is responsibility of the Mayor. Transport in London is devolved to the Mayor and delivered by Transport for London. It is a matter for the Mayor to determine how to increase step-free access at underground stations. And if the honourable member is embarrassed about the situation, I suggest she takes this case straight back to the Labour London Mayor of London.
Dean Greening.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Heathrow flight paths go over the most densely populated part of our country, London communities. Drones are obviously a clear public safety risk as things stand. Does the Secretary of State agree that we should review the decision to further expand Heathrow and have more flights over more communities on public safety grounds?
I'm afraid, Mr. Speaker, I don't agree with my right honourable friend. What I think we need to do, and airports in this country and around the world are now working intensively to make sure they can deliver technology that will deal with this issue. That needs to be done long before we ever get to the point of expanding Heathrow Airport.
Kirsty Blackman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. How much additional funding will his department require in the 2019-20 financial year in the event of no deal, and has the Treasury approved this?
We have an allocation of funding for next year, Mr. Speaker, but actually almost all of our expenditure has taken place within the current year. It's in the region of £70 million. That is the prime amount we're spending. Obviously, in the next financial year, if we do require some of the contingency capacity I've committed, there will be a cost, and the House is aware the maximum that we contract for is £103 million.
Sentence. Anna Seabury.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, could the Secretary of State please give us an update on the Midland Main Line delayed franchise system? As he knows, I'm very grateful to the conversation that we've already had. Stagecoach has taken out £35 million of profit, and they do appear to be running down an otherwise excellent system. Can he please tell us when is this franchise going to be awarded?
Well, Mr. Speaker, the slight delay to the issuing a new franchise is for complex reasons related to rail pensions. What I would say is I have noted the issues that she's raised. I am concerned about it. It would be unacceptable for any current franchisee to run down a franchise in the event in the run up to renewal, and a strong message being sent to the company that if it is happening, it's got to stop right now.
Mr. Speaker, it's not clear to me what the unforeseeable emergency was that allowed the Secretary of State to award the contract to Seabourn Ferries outside the rules. Did he receive explicit legal advice about this, and if so, will he consider publishing that?
Mr. Speaker, we are confident that this was a proper procurement process handled by the procurement teams of my department in the normal way.
Finally, what a difficult choice. Hugh Merriman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'll buy him a cup of tea in a minute. Would the Roads Minister meet with me to discuss how we can transfer a section of the A21 through Hurst Green from the hopeless Highways England to East Sussex County Council before more of my constituents end up in hospital?
The honourable gentleman will wear his Arsenal tie a bit more often. Minister.
I'm not going to comment on that sartorial choice, Mr. Speaker. Of course, I completely disagree with my honourable friend's description of Highways England, but I would be delighted to meet with him.
Thank you. Yes, indeed. I will take the point of order, which I think is of some salience. Point of order, Justine Greening.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In relation to the debate we're about to have, the government has already said that it's accepted some amendments, and concerningly, they seem to directly contradict the withdrawal agreement that this House is debating whether to approve or not, which is in itself a legal document that has been negotiated and agreed with the European Union and 27 member states. And again, Mr. Speaker, it seems to have accepted amendments which I'm not sure whether you yourself have yet selected for debate. Can you tell me whether all of this is in order?
Yes. I'm extremely grateful to the Right Honourable Lady for her point of order. It is important that people within this chamber and outside know the procedure and know the facts. No amendments have been accepted by anyone to date for one very simple and compelling reason. No amendments have yet been selected by the occupant of the chair. Moreover, no amendments can be selected by the Speaker until the last day of the debate, that is to say next Tuesday, as required by the order of the House of 4th of December. Some people, it seems, certainly not the Right Honourable Lady, really do need to keep up. Business question, Valerie Vaz.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will the Leader of the House please give us the forthcoming business?
The Leader of the House, Andrew Leadsom.
The business for next week will be, on Monday the 14th of January, continuation of debate on Section 13(1)(b) of the European Union Withdrawal Act of 2018. Tuesday the 15th of January, conclusion of debate on Section 13(1)(b) of the European Union Withdrawal Act 2018. Wednesday the 16th of January, second reading of the Immigration and Social Security Coordination EU Withdrawal Bill. Thursday the 17th of January, debate on a motion on mental health first aid in the workplace, followed by a debate on a motion on children's social care in England. The subjects for these debates were determined by the Backbench Business Committee. Friday the 18th of January, the House will not be sitting. Mr. Speaker, I would like to follow the remarks made by a number of members this week and offer my condolences following the sad passing of Lord Ashdown and Lord Foster, two much-loved and popular figures who gave so much to politics and to their parties. Their families are in our thoughts. I know members will have been as shocked and appalled as I was to witness the abuse levelled at our colleague, the Right Honourable Member for Broxtowe. I hope we can start this new year in Parliament by setting a good example for others to follow. And finally, Mr. Speaker, I hope all honourable members had a calm and restful break over Christmas, and I'd like to wish everyone a happy and productive new year. Thank you.
Valerie Vaz.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and can I thank the Leader of the House for the business next week, albeit 1 week, and join her in paying tribute to Lord Ashdown and Lord Foster, who were both very great servants of this House. And I too want to express our solidarity with the Honourable Member for Broxtowe. She should never have been treated and abused in that way while going about her lawful business. But there are other honourable members who are also suffering these difficulties, and they're doing so quietly because there are cases ongoing. Could we have a date for an Opposition Day debate, please? We haven't had one since the 13th of November. And the Leader of the House helpfully gave us the Easter recess date. She knows what I'm going to ask, and that's the May dates. The House needs to plan. But, Mr. Speaker, this is a government without a majority, in crisis, and in denial about the crisis. The government has faced 2 defeats in 1 week, breaking records. This is the first government to be defeated on a finance bill since 1978. Our constituencies, businesses, the science community, the NHS, security and this House have made it clear that the government should rule out a no-deal Brexit. Yet the government has refused to do so. In fact, the government is making plans for no deal. That's why this House, who our constituents elected, can't rely on the government mantras or a cabinet who seem to discuss the fantasies of 50-year-old swingers, arrange a no-deal scenario with 89 lorries when 10,000 lorries use the Channel ports, and contracts are being given out for services which don't exist. So that's why a concerned House voted for an amendment that the government should come back within 3 sitting days, because, Mr. Speaker, this government can't be trusted. How many times over the years in this place over the years that we have heard, no, this cannot be done, no, women can't have the vote, no, we can't be on the floor of the chamber, but we have to be up there, no, the Fixed Term Parliament Act can't be altered, but in fact it has. A former well-respected Attorney General tabled an amendment and Parliament rose up because the evidence is clear. In December, the government agreed and tabled a motion. The vote was agreed for the 11th of December. The government pulled the vote. The government said no to this House, Mr. Speaker, no to a vote, treating a democratically elected Parliament with contempt, while itself being in contempt. So can the Leader of the House categorically confirm today that a meaningful vote will take place on Tuesday, the 15th of January? Mr. Speaker, there are no new amendments, legal or otherwise. It's the same old agreement. Nothing has changed. Just a written statement by the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster yesterday announcing the publication of a policy paper on UK government commitments to Northern Ireland. Warm words and reassurances, but nothing but the same old agreement. The Right Honourable Member for Belfast North has called this cosmetic and meaningless. So can the leader say whether a new agreement will be tabled before Tuesday, or will the House be voting on the same old agreement? Mr. Speaker, on Monday, the House debated the fifth report of the Committee on Standards. My right honourable friend, the member for Worley, intervened on the Leader of the House and asked what she meant when she said that the purpose of the review will be to address outstanding areas, such as how to incorporate the scheme into the scheme visitors to our constituency offices. Now, a number of colleagues have approached me and said they are unclear about what the Leader meant. So could she explain in a letter to all members what this means, and could she ensure that all members are consulted? And then later, my honourable friend, the member for New Forest West, made a point of order. To clarify, he said there is no order of the House that a debate must end at a particular time, and if members are standing at the moment of interruption, then that debate should continue at another time when time becomes available. The Deputy Speaker said, I took the decision that the question should be put to the House. I don't recall the Leader challenging the Chair on that ruling. So can the Leader of the House respond to all the questions that I and other members may have asked if the debate had continued, and when she will respond to that? Could I ask the Leader on a slightly different matter to look at the delays into the appeals for PIP? A constituent of mine sent an appeal in July 2018. My constituents are still waiting for a date for the appeal. It seems that the DWP has missed all the evidence in submission for the deadlines, and my constituents are told they'd have to wait 27 weeks for an appeal. This is unacceptable and is affecting the most vulnerable. Mr. Speaker, on a happier note, or I'm not quite sure but if it is, but it was a significant day yesterday, it was the official launch of the MP's Guide to Procedure. I was pleased to see that the chair of the Procedure Committee was there, the Honourable Member for Motherwell and Wishaw and the Honourable Member for Leeds North West. 400 copies have been given out. It showed what the House staff can do, the tremendous talent, because every single page, from the design, the layout, the words, the review, everything has been done in-house, and we should nurture that talent in-house. And thank everybody who took part, and all their names are on the inside cover. And particularly the people that you mentioned in your foreword to the book, Mr. Speaker, John Benger, Mark Hutton, and of course Joanna Dodd, who had the unenviable task of actually editing the whole process. It's a very good tome. Can I add my congratulations to the Right Honourable Members for Wokingham and for South West Devon for their knighthoods, and of course the great public servant Roy Stone, who served this House so well. And in particular the Right Honourable Member for Tynemouth. I've always called him Sir Alan. Mr. Speaker, sadly, this next week will be the last week when Fiona Channon will have served this House. She's been here since 1999, and she's had roles in the Estates team and the committee office. Fiona has always undertook her duties with efficiency, courtesy, and she's been incredibly professional, serving this House so well. She will be missed. She's only down the corridor in the House of Lords, but I hope she'll come back. Fiona, thank you very much for everything that you've done to help us function.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'd like to thank the Honourable Lady for her very warm gratitude shown to those who work so hard in this House, and I absolutely share that. And in particular, I would like to point also to Fiona Challen, who's done so much in this place, and to Roy Stone, Sir Roy Stone, who's done such a fantastic job in the Whip's office for such a long time. She asks when there'll be an Opposition Day debate, and as she'll appreciate, there is a lot of very important business at the moment, but the government will, of course, abide by our obligations to provide Opposition Days. May recess, I note her point, but I'm glad she acknowledges that we've just announced and agreed Easter recess. She asks if we'll rule out a no-deal Brexit. As she will appreciate, that is the legal default position. This House has the opportunity to vote for a deal that, by doing so, would rule out no Brexit, and they have the opportunity to do that just next Tuesday, and I encourage them to take that opportunity. She asks me to confirm, as I have just announced, that the meaningful vote will take place on Tuesday the 15th of January, and I refer her to the business of the House that I've just read out. She asks about the point of order that was raised on visitors to constituency offices. She will know full well, and I'm surprised she's asking me, because she was on the working group that established the fact that the issue under the complaints procedure of how to deal with complaints from those people who come to our constituency offices, sometimes with some very grave problems. We as Members of Parliament do always seek to help our constituents, but sometimes we're not able to do so for various complex reasons, as all honourable and right honourable members will know. And sometimes those constituents can take against the result. And so what the working group decided, that the Honourable Lady was a part of, and you, Mr. Speaker, we had regular conversations about this, we decided that in order for the complaints procedure to get up and running for 6 months, prior to dealing with the potential complexity of people with various mental health issues, potential grievances that were perhaps not valid in a complaints procedure sense, that we would deal with that at a later point. And so what we agreed in this House was that the question of how, if at all, we could deal with complaints of constituents in our constituency offices, either to our constituency staff or indeed to us as members, could be taken into account. That will be looked at under the 6-month review of the complaint scheme, and that review kicks off on the 21st of January. I will, of course, be delighted to write to all honourable and right honourable members on that point for clarity. Her further point about the issue of the other evening in terms of the Standards Committee and the issue of talking out a vote so that it was not then put that night, I can absolutely reassure her that both the member who raised the point of order and the actions of the Deputy Speaker were entirely in order, and Mr. Speaker might want to confirm that, but obviously that is a matter for him. The advice I've taken is that both were entirely in order. With regards to Pip, if she wants to write to me, I will of course take up her serious constituency matter, and of course I would point out that this government has ensured that there has been an £8 billion increase in real terms in the amount of money that we're spending on supporting people with disabilities since 2010.
Craig McKinley.
Mr. Speaker. As many may have noticed, I haven't been within this chamber as much as I might like to have been over the last 3 months. As the House will know, I was acquitted of all charges relating to the 2015 general election just yesterday in Southwark Crown Court. And I know that business questions are generally a call for debate, but in respect of election law, we fundamentally need legislative change. In this area, it is surely unacceptable that innocent people are dragged through the courts at enormous expense to the public purse on the back of abstract law. My case went through a variety of court processes prior to trial. The appeal court in March, in front of the Lord Chief Justice, agreed with the long-held principle that election expenses can only be so if authorised by a candidate or agent. The Supreme Court in July of last year overturned that view to one of mere use, whether authorised or not. Now, the opportunity for ne'er-do-wells to get involved in election processes and cause prosecutions are surely obvious. Now, all acknowledge that we have huge grey areas between the Political Parties and Elections and Referendums Act 2000, what is usually called the national spend, and the Representation of the People Act 1983, the local spend. Electoral Commission guidance is confused and it is sketchy. Now, I would not want anybody in this House, from whatever side, to go through what I've been through over the last 3 years. Surely it is in the interest of the House and all members that we have clear and unambiguous law. And I hope that a campaign for clarity in this area will be supported across this House.
Leader of the House.
Well, can I say to my honourable friend that I am delighted for him that he has been fully acquitted, and I congratulate him on that, and my heart goes out to him for the difficult time that he's had in recent years in clearing his name. And I think on a non-partisan basis all honourable members across this House would recognise what a difficult time he's been through, and it is fantastic that he has been found not guilty of any offence. It has become apparent from broader legal proceedings that election law on spending in 2015 was fragmented and unclear, with even the courts divided on the interpretation of the law. The Government will be taking steps to ensure there's a clearer and transparent framework in future elections, working alongside the Electoral Commission. It's in everybody's interest that we get this right, and the Government is committed to protecting and strengthening electoral integrity.
Pete Wishart.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and can I thank Leader of the House for announcing the business for next week, and can I also join in the tributes to Lord Ashdown, Lord Foster, congratulate Sir Roy Stone on his well-deserved honour, and wish Fiona Channing all the best. Well, yesterday was truly appalling and embarrassing. For the second business week in a row, the government benches were reduced to nothing more than a braying mob, finding conspiracy in car stickers. And once again, we find the Leader of the House centre stage as the principal cheerleader egging her colleagues on in this unedifying spectacle. This has to stop, Mr. Speaker, and the Conservatives must start to respect the authority of the House and the authority of your office, because this is appalling, utter appalling hypocrisy. This is a government that has done its level best to curtail debate, to withhold information from this House, and even had the courts compel them to allow us to have a vote on leaving the European Union, and it was only successive votes of this House that got them to reveal vital information about their Brexit deal. It's a government that has been found in contempt of Parliament. It is absolutely right that they are stopped. And you know what, Mr. Speaker? It's called taking back control, a concept that might be a little bit familiar to them. This House must have its collective view known, and you, Mr. Speaker, are to be commended in ensuring that the view of this House will always come first. And the government better get used to it. It better get used to it, because Parliament is increasingly asserting itself. As this chaotic government continues to spectacularly collapse, it will be this House and the membership of this House that will pick up the slack. If this government wants government versus Parliament, it will be on the losing side, because we are now in the majority. Now, Mr. Speaker, there's no business scheduled for a week on Monday, and that's the day that this government is now obliged to come back with its alternative to the Prime Minister's deal. Will the Leader of the House confirm today that that's exactly what they will do? They will come back and explain the options. And is she now actively considering what these options are? But, Mr. Speaker, it feels a little bit like the end of Tory days. It's unusual for a country to witness the collapse of a government in such a chaotic and spectacular and shambolic style. So therefore, maybe we could have a debate, or perhaps we could call it a vote of confidence, so that this country could be shot of this chaotic government once and for all.
Leader of the House.
Thank you. Well, I genuinely value the honourable gentleman's views, and I've listened to him very carefully, and I absolutely agree with him that taking back control is absolutely essential. The problem, the fatal flaw with his assertion, is that yesterday was not Parliament taking back control. What happened yesterday, and in the days in the run-up was that a number of honourable members tried to put amendments to the motion of the House yesterday. A number of them across all sides of the House tried to put forward amendments to the business motion. The Table Office said the motion was unamendable and undebatable. I've taken advice. The honourable gentleman is shouting from a sedentary position, how do I know? I know that the Table Office turned members away, saying that the motion was unamendable and undebatable. And if the honourable gentleman looks carefully at Erskine May, he will see that forthwith means unamendable and not debatable. So to the honourable gentleman's point about Parliament taking back control, the issue is that the role of the Chair is to uphold the rules that Parliament has made for itself, not to arbitrarily change those rules. So yesterday was not an example of Parliament taking back control. It was an example of a differentiation between those members who were told that it was unamendable and undebatable and those who were told differently. To the honourable gentleman's other points on will the Prime Minister, will the Government accept the Grieve Amendment? Of course the Government will do so. The Prime Minister has shown her willingness to always return to this House at the first possible opportunity if there is anything to report in terms of our Brexit deal, and we will continue to do so. And then finally, to his point of no confidence, as I have said time and again, should this House have no confidence and should the official opposition put an issue of no confidence to this House under the Fixed Term Parliaments Act, then it is the convention that the Government will provide time to debate it. The official opposition has not chosen to do so. Therefore, this House has confidence in Her Majesty's Government.
Order. I'd look forward to hearing from colleagues who do have the chance to participate in the business question, as of course the Right Honourable Lady, the Leader of the House, has not merely the opportunity but the obligation to do so. So I will content myself simply with saying this. There was nothing arbitrary about the conduct of the Chair yesterday. This Speaker is well aware of how to go about the business of chairing the proceedings of the House, because he's been doing so for nine and a half years. And I hope colleagues will understand when I say that I require no lessons or lectures from others about how to discharge my obligations to Parliament and in support of the rights of backbench parliamentarians. I have been doing it, I'm continuing to do it, and I will go on doing it, no matter how much abuse I get from whatever quarter. It is water off a duck's back as far as I am concerned. Mr. Richard Benyon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last night in Westminster Hall there was a debate on the armed forces, in which a minister very eloquently put the case for more spending on defence, not just in terms of the threat this country faces, but the wider benefits to society of our armed forces. Would there be time, in government time, to have such a debate, to really make the case for investment in our armed forces?
Well, I'm very sympathetic to my honourable friend. He'll be aware that during the budget, the Chancellor pledged an extra £1 billion to the MOD over the next 2 years. We do have defence questions on Monday, and I encourage him to raise it then.
Ian Mearns.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the Leader of the House for the business statement and for announcing the two backbench business committee debates for next Thursday. That's very welcome, given that both of those debates had been pulled on previous days because of overrunning other business. Could I also give notice, Mr. Speaker, that we have had an application in for a debate on Holocaust Memorial Day, and if we could find any time in the week beginning the 21st of January, the committee would be most grateful for that, because it is within that week that we would remember Holocaust Memorial Day. And a little advertisement, Mr. Speaker, the Backbench Business Committee, in collaboration with the Liaison Committee, of course, are inviting applications for Estimates Day debate applications to discuss departmental estimates. And the day for these debates is yet to be determined, but will have to be prior to the 18th of March.
Thank you. Leader of the House.
Well, as ever, I'm grateful to the honourable gentleman for giving a heads-up of his backbench committee requests, and I will certainly take that away and look carefully at it.
Sir John Hay.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The present is formed by what we know, and the future is shaped by what we learn. And in that spirit, the Workers' Educational Association reaches 50,000 people a year through a network of branches and an army of volunteers. It teaches everything from architecture to arithmetic, from computer skills to competence in English. And yet, alarmingly, it now faces a 28% cut in its core funding. You, Mr. Speaker, will doubtless be familiar with the words of the Commission on Adult Education from 1919, which said, "Adult education is a permanent national necessity, an inseparable aspect of citizenship, and therefore should be both universal and lifelong." Is this generation to forget what its forefathers knew? That for whatever disadvantages people face, they deserve the chance to bask in the light of learning.
The Leader of the House.
Well, I certainly agree with my right honourable friend about the importance of learning. I'm not aware of the organisation that he mentions, but I'm sure that he will, in his usual way, seek an adjournment debate so that he can raise the issue directly with ministers.
Chris Leslie.
Mr. Speaker, can we show some understanding for the Leader of the House, who is obviously struggling a little bit at having been defeated in the vote that took place yesterday? It's very difficult sometimes when one loses a vote, and we really should show some appreciation to how she's struggling to reconcile herself with being in that losing position. Perhaps the Leader of the House, though, can answer that question and confirm that she's keeping that space free on Monday the 21st of January for after the Prime Minister's proposals have been defeated, so that the House will come forward and be able to debate what comes next. She wouldn't want to fail to comply with the instructions of the House, albeit that she's a bit sore at having lost on that particular point. And finally, could she confirm excellently that she will also be publishing the advice that her officials are giving her about Monday the 21st of January, since she was entreating the House and the Speaker to publish all the advice that is given to him?
Leader of the House.
Well, I'm slightly disappointed at the honourable gentleman for helpfully mansplaining my job to me. I am perfectly able to carry out my job, and I have already answered the question, as put by the honourable gentleman, that the Prime Minister will, of course, abide by the terms of the Grieve Amendment.
Antoinette Sandbach.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I ask the Leader of the House to consider giving legislative time for the introduction of legislation for a housing ombudsman? I and a number of members are having problems with cowboy builders, particularly a building firm called Southwold Construction in my constituency that is building substandard homes. A number of companies, headed up by a number of directors, have folded, all with the similar directorships, and it is causing a great concern not only to my constituents but other members' constituents, particularly this company.
Well, I know that my honourable friend is a great champion for her constituency, and I'm also aware that many honourable and right honourable members are very concerned about the quality of house building. She will be aware that the Department for Local Government are looking carefully at this issue, at what more can be done, but I absolutely applaud her for raising this in this place and encourage her to perhaps seek a Westminster Hall debate so that other honourable members can join in with the conversation about what more needs to be done.
Stella Creasy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Jaden Moody was a 14-year-old little boy who was mown down by thugs in my constituency on Tuesday night and then stabbed to death. He is the 6th child that my community has had to bury in the last 18 months. Many more have been stabbed or attacked with guns in my constituency. Now, I know the Leader of the House will understand the concern I think that myself, the member for Gedling, the member for Leighton and Wanstead share about policing and the importance of police resources, but we also want to prevent the these instances. And too many of the histories of these young people involve exclusion from mainstream schooling. Too many of our young people are being written off. The government announced last March they were doing a review into exclusion. So can we have an urgent update on that review and what is being done to put proper support into helping these young people to save their potential rather than to see more families having to bury children because of youth violence?
Well, I absolutely agree with the Honourable Lady. We have to do everything we possibly can to stop young people getting into this life of danger to themselves and to others around them. She will be aware that I've already given 2 days of full debate on what more we can do in the area of prevention, and we do have Home Office questions on the 21st of January, and I encourage her to raise it there. But she will be aware that the government has introduced our Serious Violence Task Force, that we're committing hundreds of millions of pounds into community projects that are seeking specifically to get young people out of those directions that lead to a life of knife crime and potential death to themselves or to their colleagues. And we need to do everything we possibly can, but the government is absolutely committed to it.
John Lamont.
Very much, Mr. Speaker. The 4th of February is World Cancer Day. I'm delighted that you, Mr. Speaker, and the Lord Speaker have kindly agreed to the request to illuminate the palaces of Westminster in pink to mark that day. But I wondered if the Leader of the House would join me in congratulating Elaine Munro from Selkirk in my constituency, who's a Cancer Research UK volunteer, who suggested this proposal, and would we find time for a debate to look at the causes of cancer and how we can address it?
Here, Leader of the House.
Well, I'm delighted to join my honourable friend in commending Elaine for her excellent idea. Fighting cancer is a top priority for the government, and survival rates are at a record high. There are around 7,000 people alive today who wouldn't have been if mortality rates had stayed the same as in 2010. But there is much more we can do, and our 10-year plan for the NHS will radically overhaul early detection and boost research and innovation. So I think we're in a good place, more to do, but we're committed to eradicating this terrible problem of cancer.
Vernon Coker.
In following my honourable friend for Walthamstow, I know the comments later from my honourable friend for Leighton, Jaden Moody's murder has shocked us all. And I think the country would expect this House, notwithstanding the very important other issues that we are discussing, to actually reflect on what we're actually going to do about the fact that a 14-year-old boy has been brutally murdered on our streets. He's just moved from my constituency to Walthamstow. We can be outraged, we can be shocked, as we all are, but what are we going to do about it? What is this Parliament going to do about it? We can all say this should happen or that should happen. The Leader, I know, shares this concern, and she outlines the Serious Violence Task Force and the strategy the government have got. But surely the Home Secretary should be coming to this House on a regular basis to update us all on what is happening and, to be frank, what is working or what isn't working. Because nobody wants to see this again. We can't rewind the clock. But we owe it to Jaden Moody and all the other victims and their families and communities to show that we know what is going on, we care, and we're going to work with them to do as much as we can to stop it.
Leader of the House.
Well, again, I totally agree with the honourable gentleman. We owe it to Jaden's family to do everything we possibly can. If I could just possibly outline some specific actions that the government is taking. So there's a £200 million youth endowment fund to provide support to children and young people who are at risk from a life in that sort of knife crime, gang-related world, drugs-related world, to try and stop that. There's £22 million over the next 2 years through a new early intervention youth fund to support youth groups and communities with their attempts at early intervention and prevention. There's over £1 million for the anti-knife crime community fund to help communities themselves tackle knife crime. There are youth violence intervention programmes such as Red Thread, who are supporting in London and its expansion to Birmingham and Nottingham. And some of these projects will go into hospitals where young people have been attacked with knives and try and persuade them at the bedside to choose a different path. And of course, we've been been carrying out a knife-free campaign, and the police have Operation Sceptre, which is looking at giving knife amnesties. So the government is doing a lot, but I totally agree with him. We owe it to Jayden's family and to all of the families of so many people who are suffering from this appalling spike in knife crime. It is absolutely unacceptable.
Mr. Ian Littlegranger.
Thank you very much. Can we please have a debate in government time on borrowing by local councils? It is now getting out of control, and you just have to read the Times today. The Leader of the House, I'm sure, has. Our local council has borrowed 16 million to build a spec hotel on a derelict site. This is potentially a disaster for the taxpayers of my constituency and neighbouring constituencies, with the Leader of the Council who is far too close to the developers. We need to have a proper instruction from central government on the borrowing that councils can use to buy spec developments. Can we have time in this place to discuss this?
Leader of the House.
Well, my honourable friend raises an issue that's clearly of great concern to him. I would recommend that he perhaps raises it in a parliamentary written question to the department as to the specifics of the legitimacy of the project he's outlining.
John Cryer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The murder of, following the questions from my two honourable friends, the murder of Jayden Moody 2 nights ago, which was in my honourable friend's constituency, although very close to the boundary with my own constituency, it seems to be a new low in the wave of violent crime which has swept London and other parts of Britain, of knife crime in particular, are not there. And this is a view shared across the House, not just on this side. The resources are simply not there to deal with it. Surely, as my honourable friend the member for Gaggling said, under these circumstances, the Home Secretary and junior ministers from the Home Office surely should be coming to the House on a regular basis, asking the Speaker to make statements, to update us on what's happening, and to allow us to question the Executive.
Well, again, I pay tribute to all of those honourable members who are raising, as they often do, this appalling problem that we have in our country of this rise in knife crime. It's incredibly concerning. I won't repeat the answer I gave to his honourable friend, but we do, of course, have the Offensive Weapons Bill, which is also seeking to make it more difficult for young people to access knives online and so on. But I would encourage honourable members to perhaps seek a backbench business debate or a Westminster Hall debate before such time as I can offer more parliamentary time. I've given 2 days of debate to it. We do have Home Office questions on Monday the 21st, and he may wish to raise it directly with ministers there.
Fiona Bruce.
Can we have a debate on the importance of academic freedom, and that what universities are about is the free and frank exchange of ideas, even if they are unfashionable and unpopular? And isn't it wholly unacceptable to suggest that a respected academic like John Finnis, Professor Emeritus of Law and Legal Philosophy, who's taught at Oxford for some 40 years, should be removed from office simply for holding traditional Catholic views? Isn't this the opposite of diversity and open, robust debate?
My honourable friend raises a very important point. It is essential that at universities young people learn how to engage in robust debate and challenge views with which they may not agree. The solution is not to silence those who make them. The government has said in its response to the Joint Committee's report that it has concerns about the culture in universities in relation to free speech, and we've made clear our response to that Joint Committee report is that all education is a place where students should be exposed to a range of ideas, including those that may be controversial and unpopular, and where they learn to think critically and challenge those who they disagree with, not shut them down.
Liz Saville-Roberts.
And I too would like to congratulate Sir Roy Stone on his knighthood. Could time be found for a debate on the urgent matter of the incarcerated Kurdish MP and former mayor Leyla Guven, who today entered her 64th day on hunger strike in protest at the continued isolated imprisonment of PKK leader Abdullah Öcalan. Members of the Kurdish community in Wales, including Ilan Sis of Newport, are among 200 Kurds worldwide who are undertaking hunger strikes in solidarity. Ilan is presently in his 25th day of fasting. Surely we should send a clear message of support for fellow democratically elected representatives arrested and imprisoned for the very act of representing their people.
Leader of the House.
Well, the Honourable Lady is absolutely right to raise that issue here. It is vital that all those who seek to represent their communities in a legitimate and law-abiding way should be free to do so. She'll be aware that we have Foreign Office questions on Tuesday the 22nd of January, and I encourage her to raise it then.
Mr Douglas Ross.
Mr Speaker, can we have a debate about traditional events such as the burning of the Clavey? On Friday of this week, I'll be joining thousands of others in Burghead to watch Clavey King Dan Ralph and his crew carry a barrel of burning wood and tar through the village up to Dury Hill, where it then burns out to celebrate New Year. So will my right honourable friend also join me in congratulating Dan Ralph for his 31st year as Clavey King and everyone involved in keeping this ancient tradition alive?
Fantastic. My honourable friend, as ever, raises what sounds like a superb event in his constituency. I certainly hope that Clavey King Dan Ralph continues to attend for many years to come. The government certainly fully recognises the contribution that the UK's oral traditions, social practices and festive events make to the country's cultural fabric, and continues to encourage communities to celebrate these practices and continue them for future generations.
Luciana Berger.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I listened very closely to the Leader of the House when she said that the Prime Minister will abide by the result of the vote yesterday. She didn't categorically guarantee that that means her government will schedule the next motion for Monday, the 21st of January, after the government lose the meaningful vote, as we anticipate will happen next Tuesday. I wonder if she could do that. And will she also confirm where and when she will lodge copies of the advice she receives from officials on these matters, as she also indicated in a previous answer?
Well, I can absolutely reassure the Honourable Lady that my advice was that the amendment selected yesterday would not be in order, it would not be selectable. That's the advice that I received. I hope that that's very clear. With regards to whether the government will abide by the Grieve Amendment, the government will abide by the Grieve Amendment. I hope that is now entirely clear.
The responsibility for the selection of amendments is, of course, and I say this not just for members of the House, but for those attending to our proceedings, a matter for the Chair. It is a matter for the representative and champion of Parliament. It is not a matter for a representative of the executive branch, who is the executive's representative in the chamber of the House of Commons. I'll do my job, and other people can seek to do theirs. Bob Blackman.
Mr Speaker, before Christmas I raised the serious concern of the escalation of aggravated burglaries in my constituency. I have to say, these are organised gangs of thugs who break into people's houses when people are home, beat them up, steal their goods, steal their address books so they can move on to the next house. This, unfortunately, Mr Speaker, has escalated over Christmas and New Year, and I understand from honourable colleagues across the House that this is going on in other constituencies as well. So can we have a debate in government time on how we challenge this, how we support the police in taking action, and we bring these criminals to justice and imprison them as they deserve?
Leader of the House.
Well, I share every one of my honourable friends' concerns about this matter. It is horrendous for anybody who's been burgled. I myself have a constituent who was burgled recently and found it absolutely traumatising. So he's right to raise it as a very, very serious issue. We do have Home Office questions on the 21st of January, or indeed he might want to seek an adjournment debate so he can discuss the particular problem with his constituents.
Mr Barry Sherman.
Mr Speaker, can I surprise the Leader of the House by telling her that in May of this year I hope to celebrate 40 years in the House?
140.
But can I tell her that in all those years I don't remember a worse atmosphere in this House? There is something deeply wrong with the way we're talking to each other, the way we're communicating with each other. And stress at work is not a good thing wherever you work. So I'd like an early debate, and I'd like her to take the lead. I look at her and realise that she's got a really tough job. I've known leaders of the House where the job has been a doddle. The government's had a majority, they get their legislation, there's no problem, and they very often had a very easy speaker that does everything that the executive told him to do, or her. But the fact is, she's got a tough job. She's got no majorities, she's losing votes, it's very stressful, and I do care about her, and I worry about her. And sometimes people lash out when they're under stress. But she has a responsibility of doing something about the way we treat each other in this House. Let us have a debate, let's do some initiative, and she could lead it, to start giving an example to people out there that we can treat each other decently and positively. Please, will she take a lead in that?
Leader of the House.
Well, I'm really grateful to the Honourable Gentleman for what he said and the way he said it. And he is absolutely right that in this place we do need to treat each other with courtesy and respect. And, of course, every member who comes here is elected by their constituents to represent them. And so it cannot be right that any of us seek to control any of the others of us, but at the same time we do have a shared desire to see Parliament be a good role model. I will think carefully about his words, and I will absolutely never flounce again. He has my undertaking on that
point. Jeremy Lefroy.
Very much, Mr. Speaker. Later this year, there is the triennial replenishment of the global fund against HIV/AIDS, TB and malaria. This is an incredibly important fund which has contributed to the reduction of deaths on a wide scale across the world. Could we have a debate on the importance of this fund, particularly as some of the progress is stalling, not because of lack of work, but because of resistance to drugs, for instance, in the case of malaria?
Well, my honourable friend is raising an incredibly important point. I'm extremely sympathetic to that. Eradicating TB, malaria and the problem of HIV/AIDS is absolutely vital for the sake of our world. And I would absolutely encourage him to seek a debate, perhaps a Westminster Hall debate, and I will consider whether we can give government time to such a debate in the future.
Douglas Chapman.
The Leader of the House will no doubt be aware that Judith Costa attended the Parliament this week as the Deputy Speaker of the Catalan Parliament and indeed met with the Deputy Speaker of this House. And just wondering, the Catalan politicians and indeed their former Speaker of the Catalan Parliament are now facing trial in Spain imminently for supporting the manifesto of their properly elected government and indeed respecting the will of their own Parliament. And I'm sure that there is no one in this House that would want our Speaker placed in a similar position for any potential misdemeanours. But will the Leader of the House make time, government time, to allow us to debate the situation in Catalonia and to allow members to express their anger at some of the situations that politicians, properly elected politicians, are having to face in their own country?
Well, I think the Honourable Gentleman raises a very important point. Spain is a key ally. They are a very strong democracy, and it is right that they, as they do, abide by their own laws at all times. Nevertheless, the Honourable Gentleman raises a very important point. He may well wish to seek an adjournment debate or indeed to raise his question at Foreign and Commonwealth Affairs Questions on the 22nd of January.
James Morris.
Thanks so much. A statement from the Department of Communities and Local Government about ongoing issues to do with conduct by some members of Sandwell Metropolitan Borough Council. Following my adjournment debate last year into Sandwell Council, there are still many issues still outstanding in respect of standards and conduct of some councils within that authority. Only last weekend, The Times reported an email exchange between the leader of the council and West Midlands Police, where Councillor Steve Ealing called for the immediate arrest of a blogger who had criticised him and the council, and stated that if this individual was not arrested, the police would be in contempt and it would be a matter for the Home Secretary. Could the Leader of the House find time for a Minister from Communities and Local Government to come to the House to explain what the government is going to do to help my constituents in Raleigh Regis understand what is going on within Sandwell Council?
Well, my honourable friend raises what sounds like a very concerning situation. I would certainly encourage him either to seek a further adjournment debate so he can debate it directly with ministers, or perhaps to seek to see one of the ministers in the department so that he can raise directly what are some very specific issues.
Paula Sheriff.
Mr. Speaker, as temperatures drop, we need more than ever to tackle the growing epidemic of homelessness, which is frankly killing people. I'll be joining the big sleep out at Huddersfield Town Stadium in March, raising funds locally. If any members might want to join me for a night under the stars, they will be very welcome. But we need to do much more, and the government efforts are clearly not working. They are not enough, they are inadequate. So can we have a debate on how we may reach a cross-party consensus on how we move forward and end the cancer that is homelessness?
Leader of the House.
Well, the Honourable Lady is quite right to raise this issue, and I commend her for taking part in the big sleep out. It sounds slightly romantic, but I'm sure it won't be. Obviously, homelessness is a scourge in our society. It is incredibly difficult, and we've seen ourselves just outside Parliament here. I've certainly worked with the House authorities to look at what more can be done to support those people who are homeless outside this place, but right across the country, as she will be aware, there are very complex reasons why people become homeless, and I'm aware, for example, that Westminster Council say that there are places for homeless people, but getting them to use them is difficult for a number of reasons. There's a lot more that we are doing. We've committed over £1.2 billion to tackle homelessness and rough sleeping, and as she will know, we have very clear targets to reduce the problem of homelessness and rough sleeping over a very short period of time.
Chris Green.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The original version of the Greater Manchester Spatial Framework that the local Labour leadership drew up was so bad it was criticised by 27,000 residents as well as Conservative colleagues across Greater Manchester. It was rightfully torn up and started again. The new version of GMSF is better, especially because it has more of a focus on the redevelopment of Bolton Town Centre. Can we have a debate on the importance of listening to local residents who emphasise the importance of redeveloping our town centres and brownfield sites rather than Labour's focus on using Greenbelt first?
Well, my honourable friend raises an incredibly important issue. I know all of us share a desire to see more homes built, more thriving high streets, but at the same time to protect the green belt. He's absolutely right to raise this issue, and I would encourage him to seek an adjournment debate so he can discuss it directly with ministers.
Kirsty Blackman.
Mr. Speaker, I'm hoping the Leader of the House can advise me on how to get the government to take action on this. People who are fleeing domestic violence are facing the most uncertain time in their lives. If they have come from another country that's outside the EEA, they've got an ability to apply for a destitution domestic violence concession. If they're fleeing domestic violence but they originate from inside the EEA, the response that I've had from the government suggests that they should go home to their home country rather than be able to apply. They cannot apply through this domestic violence concession route. How do I get the Home Office to take this issue seriously? I have reports of women returning to abusers because they have no recourse to public funds on fleeing from their abusive home. Please, could the Leader get the government to take this seriously?
Well, I'm very concerned to hear what the Honourable Lady has to say. She will be aware that the government has committed £100 million of funding into projects that support those organisations who are helping women who've suffered violence. If she would like to write to me with the specifics of the case she's talking about, I'm very happy to take it up on her behalf.
Henry Smith.
Mr. Speaker, the Labour leadership of Crawley Borough Council has recently wasted around £500,000 on a delayed IT project, obviously at great expense to local taxpayers. And when constituents have sought freedom of information request from the local authority, that has been obstructed. Can we have a statement from the Communities and Local Government Secretary of State on the importance of efficiency and probity of local councils like Crawley?
My honourable friend raises a concerning case, and I know there are too often examples where projects go wrong and therefore waste taxpayers' money, which can never be right. He will be aware that there are very clear rules around the use of taxpayers' money in such examples. I would encourage him to perhaps do a parliamentary question to the department to seek a ruling on specifically this issue.
Chris Elmore.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I've been contacted by a constituent who lives part of the year in Portugal. They're concerned about being able to drive and hold car insurance in both countries if they have to exchange their UK licence for a Portuguese one, so they can continue to drive in the EU if we leave the EU. I know that I can't have the only constituent with this concern. Now, I'm aware it was Transport Questions before Leaders' Questions. I did try and catch the Speaker's eye, but I was out of luck. So I'm just wondering whether the Leader could ask the Transport Secretary to come to the floor of the House and make a statement around these licensing issues and around the issues of car insurance for those people who live part-time in the European Union.
Yes. Well, I'm sorry the Honourable Gentleman didn't get to ask his question directly of Transport Ministers, but I will do my best to say that there is now a government communications plan to try and provide specific answers to such questions. Now, I didn't have prior notice of this one, so I don't know whether that's included in it, but the government is promoting through national radio and so on, directing consumers, householders to the gov.uk website to seek specific answers to questions about what happens when we leave the EU. As I say, whether the answer to that question will be there, I don't know, but I would absolutely be willing, if he would like to write to me after this, to take it up with the department on his behalf.
Mark Palsey.
Mr. Speaker, to the great relief of children and parents in Rugby, Yum Yum World, which is our Willy Wonka-style high street attraction, has been saved. And that's because they have finally had an unfair business rates bill slashed by £59,000. The Valuation Office has 2 years to respond to a challenge on business rates, which is far too long for a small business overpaying by such a huge amount. So can we have a debate to consider the priority of institutions such as this keeping our town centres alive?
Well, can I congratulate Yum Yum for their survival? I think there'll be plenty of children and some adults who will be delighted about that, but just go easy on the sugar, everybody. But he's raising a very important point about business rates and also how we can keep our high streets thriving. He'll be aware that the government has made changes that are worth more than £13 billion in aggregate to businesses, including taking over 600,000 small businesses out of paying any business rates at all. And, of course, we have our dedicated Retail Sector Council bringing government and retail sector.
Well, it's lovely to be out on such a sunny evening in Edinburgh, but it's a shame that we have to be out tonight protesting against the two-child cap and the rate clause. Well more than a year since Alison Thulis, my colleague at Westminster, first spotted it in the small print of a Tory budget.
Very glad to see such a huge demonstration today and so many people still coming along 1 year after the rate clause came into force to show their opposition to this vile and despicable policy. The UK government have never been able to justify this policy, and we saw that this week with Esther McVeigh's pathetic attempts to say that the rate clause was somehow double support for women and that gives them some kind of chance to talk about the most appalling and disturbing experience of their life.
As you can see behind me, we're at the very beginning of the All Under One Banner rally. You can obviously hear the pipers behind me as events are about to kick off.
It's time to aim high, look resolutely outwards, and never, ever accept second best. Above all, it's time to believe that we can. We can build that better country we know is possible. And friends, We will.
If you enjoy watching our programmes, please help us to be Scotland's independent broadcaster by signing up to become a Broadcasting Scotland supporter.